First of all, I want to introduce Dr. Willie James Jennings. Dr. Jennings is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor of Theology and Africana Studies at Yale Divinity School. Dr. Jennings specializes in Christian thought, race theory, and decolonial studies. I first met Dr. Jennings by one of his first books, The Christian Imagination, whom my friend Chris Smith told me to read and said, "Tim, this book is a theological masterpiece." It's actually on the book that is an endorsement for the book, and it really is a theological masterpiece. And if you hadn't read it, it's a dense book, but well worth struggling your way through, because it just reframes our whole colonial history in ways that get us thinking about a better way to relate to one another and to the land. He's also the author of After Whiteness, An Education and Belonging, and he's currently working on a 2-volume project that many of us are looking forward to reading on the doctrine of creation called Reframing the World. And I'm told by Willie that it's coming out next year, so get ready to receive that. We're grateful to have you tonight with us, Dr. Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. It is a great honor and joy for me to be here with you today. Tim invited me, and I put this on the calendar. I've been looking forward to this since the invitation came, and so I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to be out of my home country for a little while. I don't need to go into details why you would think that, but I'm thrilled to be with you all, to be with anyone trying to do this important work in the name of the living God, and to be with my colleagues who we're going to have a wonderful conversation later on. I'm so happy that I am here and not there. Friends, allow me to, first of all, bring you warmest greetings from Dean Gregory Sterling, the faculty, the staff, and the students of Yale Divinity School, where I have the joy of serving. They would want me to offer you very warm wishes, and so I'm glad to do that. I also want to acknowledge the fact that where I live in the United States, in the state of Connecticut, in the town of Hamden, sits on the land of Algonquin-speaking peoples, the Quinnipiac, the Mohican, and so many others. Yale University also sits on that unceded land. And I have made a promise that I would do everything I can in my power to honor that land as the indigenous peoples of that land have done so and continue to do so, and to be a part of every possible effort to give the land back, You know, these days, when I go places, there are folks who are tired of speakers doing these land acknowledgments. And some folks are tired of it because they think that, more needs to be done than just a land acknowledgement. I agree, much more needs to be done than just a land acknowledgement. But I at least want to start there. I want to start with what needs to be said. So I stand here before you very thankful to be alive, breathing, my feet touching the ground, and thankful to the God who made all of this possible. So, at the place where flesh touches the land, there is redemption. We know this because God became incarnate all the way to the bone and to the dirt. In Jesus, we learn that the Creator has embraced the creation. And this means that redemption is of the body and of place. But we Christians and our ministers struggle to articulate to ourselves and to the world how redemption moves between bone and dirt, between body and place. What does it mean, my friends? What does it mean to give witness to the redemption of the body in place? That's the question. And what does it mean to give witness to the redemption of place? The problem we face is that our visions of redemption separate the body from the land and from the building. Building understood here both as noun and verb. Those visions of redemption have almost nothing to do with how we live in place and how we design and build the places where we live. That is, how we form the built environment. As many of you know, but for those who may not, the built environment is all the human-made structures of living, from houses to neighborhoods, from towns to cities, sidewalks, streets, landscapes, highways. The problem we face is that our understanding of salvation is yet to touch the built environment. Another way to say this is that our geographic imaginations are enslaved and in need of the freedom God brings. That enslavement is all around us, from the multiple wars being fought over land, to our pandemic of homelessness, to our unrelenting struggles against the oligarchic forces and colonial tendencies of real estate and development. We can see the urgent need for the deliverance of our geographic imaginations. So this evening, for a few minutes, I want to explore with you, through prose and a little bit of poetry, what is involved in our taking hold of our deliverance and the deliverance of our geographic imaginations, and giving witness to the redemption of place. God has saved us in place. It's a simple sentence, but there's so much that we have to unpack with it. God has saved us in place, and salvation means that we participate in the work God has done and is doing to make place sacred. Now, what do I mean by the sacred, by sacrality as it's often called? The sacred is that which has been and is being touched by God, touched by the divine life. The sacred is that which has been, if you will, marked by God's presence, where we sense God calling us to extend our lives outward into the lives of others in a work of creating a kinship that will not yield. Let me say that again, that little phrase. A kinship that will not yield. What does it mean for a place to be sacred? And what does it mean to make a place sacred? What does it mean for a human creature to be sacred, or for a non-human creature to be sacred? These have been exceedingly important and challenging questions for Christian theology, as well as for so many indigenous peoples, especially those wrestling with a wounding Christianity. These questions have been difficult to answer this side of what is known as colonial modernity, modern colonialism from the 15th century forward. And with it, the reformation of the world inside of theft. The modern world, let's be clear, was formed in theft. Theft so wide and so deep that it is a struggle to comprehend its extent. This is no secret to anyone in this room. It has, however, been easier to accept it and think within it than to sustain a focus on its historical contours and its ever deepening effects, and even more difficult, maybe even impossible, to think and live against it, and to dream a world that might be formed against its legacy. Theft, of course, as you all know, is as ancient as human life and inherent in what we Christians have called the sinful condition. But the universality of theft should never be made an alibi for refusing to face the ways our lives have been formed in it from the beginning of modern colonialism. That legacy is far more than a massive, almost incomprehensible collection of malicious acts of thievery, of land and body. That legacy not only formed our world, but formed us for our world. We live inside theft, my friends, and theft lives inside of us. And both are troubled dwelling. Let me share a poem with you entitled, Will a Man Rob God? It's a biblical phrase. Will a man rob God? That's the title of the poem. Malachi, oh Malachi, answer your own question. Fear the answer you hear in the deafening morning mixed with laughter accumulated on ships bursting of flesh and gold. In the tears that match the ocean, year by year, watering the soil for unprecedented growth. In the building, we appear, formed of claim, minds born of lines, tattooed with boundary and border. Do you hear covenant becoming contract? The erection of monument, grasping forever. It is our lives formed in grasping forever that has become a troubled dwelling for us. That troubled dwelling has come to be through one fundamental idea. It is the idea that the world and everything in it can and should and must be owned. That is a vision of owned existence and life lived through property relations. And from that idea has formed an arrangement that now threatens life itself. Now, this evening, I am less interested in tracing the development of ideas of private property and their implementation across the global landscape, and more interested in considering the sick and deformed spirituality that formed and is yet forming inside a vision of ownership. That sick spirituality was born in the way Christian colonial settlers understood possession and forced so many native peoples to accept it. Simply put, at the heart of this change, native peoples were forced to move from a vision of possession rooted in entanglement and symbiosis, let's call that possession by, toward a vision of possession bound in ownership. Let's call that possession of. For so many indigenous peoples, as many of you know, their worlds claim them. Plant, animal, earth, ocean, river, mountain, sky, called their name, made intelligible their existence, and articulated with them the stories that ordered their lives. This was possession by. The places where they lived not only spoke to them, but spoke through them. The places they dwelt in also dwelt in them. For the colonial settlers, for the Christian colonial settlers, this was nonsense. The only real possession they believed given by God was possession of. a concrete claim of. The colonial settlers did, however, have their own sense of indwelling. It was the indwelling of ownership. The indwelling of ownership forms explicitly through the juridical and bureaucratic developments in the New World around everything from owning slaves and other chattel all the way to land ownership and ownership of one's labor and one's body. It is the ability, the power to indwell that established for the colonial settlers both a sense of spiritual freedom and material freedom. The legacy of this idea of indwelling shapes the way people claim themselves through self-possession, and claim property as extensions of the self. The spirit of ownership claiming the body, that is self-possession. The spirit of ownership extending the body into the dirt, that is private property, pressing the body across the land. And in this way, this spirit becomes a replacement for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's indwelling. That is, the spirit of the owner is now in the land. And like the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, it both binds and liberates. The spirit of ownership, as it grows from the colonial period forward, allows all of us to envision our bodies extending into the land and enabling us to sense and embrace the creation, but embrace it as that which may be owned. This sick spirituality of ownership forms the horizon upon which to understand the development of ideas like sovereignty and autonomy, recognition, territoriality, and of course, the big one, nationalism. Nationalism of blood and soil, of a people bound to a land through possession and the spirit of ownership. That spirit of ownership gave life to a distorted love of land. This distorted love of land weaves belonging with ideas of private property and collective territory, of border and boundary. This is a strained, even let's call it tragic, sense of belonging. So we meet this spirituality, this sick spirituality of ownership. We meet with it a dismal connection of body and land, made possible through the relentless struggle to claim and sustain possession. Possession in this regard is life, and dispossession is death. So now, given what I've said, what becomes of our sense of the sacred with this sick spirituality? That which is sacred is that which we own. Sacrality has become for so many people simply a practice of possession. We may claim what so many people do. We may claim, as so many people do, that the world is sacred. But in practice, my friends, in practice, what is sacred is determined by what we claim, what we sequester, what we segregate, and most importantly, what we protect. To think beyond our inherited pneumatology of ownership and its sick spirituality means thinking against what now seems obvious, necessary, irreversible, and for some people, quite natural. It would involve reestablishing a sense of belonging not based in ownership, but one rooted in a profound acknowledgement that we are created by the triune God and joined together as creatures who must create the commons. One more time. Creatures who must create the commons. What is the commons? I'm so glad you asked me. You're right here. You're right here with me. The commons is a place of sharing for the sake of thriving life. The commons is as ancient as creaturely life. Many of you know this. It has existed since the beginning of creaturely community. It forms where needs are being met in ways that bring creatures together. It can be something as simple as a watering hole or the bank of a river or a grassy field inhabited by fruit-bearing shrubs and trees. The commons is also an event when people share what they have, not only for the common good, but for creating the good in common. That is, helping to build a practice of reciprocity where giving and receiving give birth to more giving. Yet the commons is also a way of thinking and a way of being where we are always oriented toward a life of sharing, knowing that what we have because someone shared with us. Now, these three forms of the commons, braided together, are necessary to create life-giving practices of belonging and to establish. They are necessary to establish a reality of salvation in our built environment. Here's where I want to return to the idea of the sacred for just a moment. To see the sacred is to see the commons and to hear the calling to form it freshly, to form the commons freshly. Our built environments must be rethought toward the remaking of the commons. As they now exist, our built environments are created in fear, shaped in deception, and aimed toward hatred. Let me give you those three again. Created in fear, shaped in deception, and aimed toward hatred. Fear, deception, and hatred. The life of Jesus offers us deliverance from these things. So says the great African-American mystic and theologian Howard Thurman in his epic book, Jesus and the Disinherited. If you have not read that book, I want to invite you all to go get a copy of that book by Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited, published in 1949. Thurman argued in that groundbreaking and prescient book that if we want to embody the ethics of Jesus, we must embody a way of life that challenges fear, deception, and hatred. Of course, he's right, but we need to see that embodiment all the way down to the ground and the built environment. We build in fear and through fear. Fear of loss, fear of theft, fear of the other, fear of decay and devaluation, fear of inefficiency, that the thing built will not work as hoped. This means that that what we fear and what we hold as sacred are often bound together. Excuse me. Fear and sacrality bound together. When fear and the sacred meet, there you will find building and designing shaped in segregation, isolation, and the desire to control people and their environment, and their movement, One of Thurman's most famous statements about segregation's relation to fear has become a timeless observation. And let me quote him very briefly here. This is Thurman, the fear that segregation inspires among the weak in turn breeds fear among the strong and the dominant. This fear insulates the conscience against a sense of wrongdoing in carrying out a policy of segregation. For it counsels that if there were no segregation, there would be no protection against invasion of home, the church, or the school. 1949. Thurman lived in a time of hard segregation, visible, blatant, legal. We live in a time of soft segregation, established by price points, community development strategies, and of course, zoning policy. Places formed in fear will be shaped in deception. Deception in this regard is the fundamental denial of shared life and the care and concern for one another and our creaturely kin that are inherent in that truth of a shared life. For Thurman, that deception is rooted in a denial of God's sharing presence. That is, how God has been shown to be present in the good gifts of creation that God has given to all to share. Excuse me. We share in the receiving of those good gifts. Rain on the just and unjust, sunlight on the just and the unjust. And we should share in the distribution of all good gifts. There should be alignment of the giving of creation and our own giving structured into the built environment itself. So deception is most acute in the built environment when people accept a lack of thriving life simply because of where they live. They then posit the difference between places of thriving life and places of neglect or even anti-life as rooted in the agency of the people who live in such places. That is, our built environments, listen carefully, please, my friends, our built environments form a false meritocracy into the ground itself. People have nice things in their communities because they earned it. And people who live in deprived areas deserve little because they lack initiative or responsibility or a healthy work ethic. I've heard Christians say exactly this. Fear builds toward deception, and both turn us toward hatred. Thurman outlines the anatomy of hatred as follows. It begins with no warmth of contact, then no empathy, then relationships shaped in hostility, and then the full reality of unapologetic hatred. If we think about this in terms of how our communities are structured, how buildings are built, how neighborhoods, towns, cities are arranged, then it is possible to see how places, neighborhoods, towns, hamlets, cities are built in hatred. A hatred that continues long after those who built in hate are dead and gone. Hatred that builds communities where some live in floodplains and others do not. Some live near or where we send our trash, our waste, and our loudest noises, and others do not. Some live where the light and the heat of the sun meet a bountiful array of trees and shrubs, while others live with only their bodies between the sun and concrete roads and sidewalks. Thurman observed in the anatomy of hatred what I would term the architectural deception of contact. The architectural deception of contact. Architectural deception is found in the fact that just because people live structurally in proximity to one another and cross paths regularly, live close enough to see and observe and understand one another, that they are, in Thurman's words, in warm fellowship. This architectural deception conceals relentless asymmetrical exercises of power, influence, and control, and the grotesquely uneven distribution of resources. So for Thurman, only the love of God can overcome hatred deception, and fear. And to enter the love of God is to envision what might be, what we might be able to build together in the love of God. It is to envision salvation materializing in and through the commons. To envision the commons in this way is to live in anticipation of the revelation of the children of God in the world. For example, as we see in John 1 John 3, 1 through 3. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and that this is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed. What we do know is this: when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. It is this not yet appearing that should energize our work of building life together. The goal is not to capture what will be. Again, the goal is not to capture what will be. The goal is the centering of our imaginations inside the possibility of the new ways of building, new ways of embodying, new ways of designing together that dwell in the love of God on the land. And to allow those possibilities to structure life down to the bone and to the dirt. To allow those possibilities to turn us toward the commons. Let me tell you a little story as I close. I first learned of the commons on my bike. I was 10 years old when it started. My mother, God bless her soul, rest her soul, my mother would give me a bag or a cloth satchel to carry over my shoulder and would send me all over the neighborhood with food from the garden. I would arrive at Mother Slater or Mother Pickens or Deacon Young's home or any other number of folks in the community with these tomatoes and beans, potatoes, blackberries, corn, okra, or cucumbers. And I would unload my bag and reload it with what they were giving me to take back home. And then when I got home, the route would start all over again. I was Amazon before Amazon. On my bike, even with my small frame, I was an extension of the commons, my friends. But the commons was first located in the backyard, because that is where you would find the garden of Mary and Ivory Jennings. My parents, like so many other displaced U.S. Southerners who came north in the U.S. during the Great Migration, brought with them the skills of cultivating life from the dirt. My mother tried to teach me what it meant to know the dirt, to be of the dirt, to live from the dirt. Allow me to share with you a poem entitled Garden Disciple. Garden Disciple. She called me to the garden, this ritual of spring, announcing new life. There my mother on bended knee in black Michigan dirt, as if praying like in church or at her bed, made me join her on the ground, now made ready through her sweat and knowledge and water. Reach your hand in deep, she demanded, and I knew what my obedience would mean. Now I would feel the wet soil covering my hand, enveloping my wrists, pulling up my arm, pulling me in. Boy, that's life, she would say. Do you feel it? The blank stare on my face, covered with boredom, told her I did not. I was spring and too young to feel dirt knowledge. She smiled and told me to go get her seeds, dried and stored, hidden from winter, for such a time as this. Her planting begun, her mind focused on a future that only she could see. In the ground, each spot chosen for the plant that would bear witness. Soon her time of planting would be done. My time of planting has now come. My mother and father were garden disciples. They knew how to listen to the dirt, how to touch and be touched by dirt and plant. And in this way, they were drawing on ancient Native American and African dirt knowledge. But they were garden disciples in the other way. They knew how to be refreshed by the land. And I want to end with this because I need you to hear this. My parents had a pair of those old lawn chairs. You know, the cast iron kind. When you sit in those chairs, your butt almost touches the ground. They would sit in those chairs in the cool of the summer evening, letting the wind blow across their bodies, their hands caressing the ground as they laughed and talked while they cooked something on the grill. There I watched as their bodies were renewed, the energy slowly being restored. It was as though they were coming back to themselves, there near their garden, close to the dirt. But this was no private affair, because if you stood in my backyard, you could look all the way down to the end of the street, through the backyards, and the gardens of their neighbors, all of them displaced black Southerners who knew the dirt and shared the same dirt knowledge. My parents and the other black folks in the neighborhood knew how to align their lives with the giving of the earth. That's my point. With the gifts born of the dirt. Their faith, their Christian faith, instructed them in what that alignment should mean. Giving bound to belonging. The God who created them carried them in God's mighty hands, possessed them through the Holy Spirit, and now they were held in the giving reality of God's creation. In a real sense, possessed by the dirt. Held in its giving reality, given by God, and therefore belonging only to God. I learned early from my parents that the church and the garden were inextricably bound together, confirming each other. Together, they were the sites of divine instruction. Together, they were the places of holy consolation where black life that was under threat could be held close, held safe and loved. I learned that there was a bond of love, deep and wide, between someone praying for me in church and serving me apple pie made from Michigan apples. Macintosh. Or someone preaching a sermon that seemed just for me, and someone giving me blackberry cobbler made from the blackberries growing in their backyard. The church and the garden were joined together because they were a healing community and an engine, an engine of our informal economy. Between the church and the garden, I learned of a holy exchange. Not only Jesus' life for our lives, but the exchange of good gifts of the earth between one another. In the summer months, fresh fruit and vegetables, eggs and meats, especially pig meat, passed from home to home, and especially homes in great need. And when the weather turned cold and money remained slight, those same homes in need received foods that had been canned, preserved, and stored for the winter. What little money available was joined with an abundance of healthy food, and together a way was made out of no way. through the dirt and prayer. Now, I know, as many of you know, that there's a growing appreciation for gardens and community gardens among many churches. But what I'm pointing toward here is something far more substantive than that appreciation. I am pointing toward the soteriological significance of the commons. The commons is meant to become the place where our salvation, embodied in Jesus, materializes here and now between the giving of God and the giving of the ground. And by ground, of course, I include the sea and the air and our animal kin who give their lives for us. What would it mean to embed our faith in living toward the commons? It would mean aligning our living and our dwelling with the abundant giving of God and the earth in such a way as to make visible our connectivity as creatures. Allow me to share a final poem entitled, "What If They Claimed You?" What if they claimed you? Are you listening? Final poem. That great getting up morning, we woke to vines joined to our skin. So tightly, so completely, the entire medical establishment could not distinguish between flesh and vine connecting through buildings, roads, and highways, across bodies of water, mountains and valleys, running through walls, halls, malls, ballparks, connecting each of us to trees, big and small, healthy and diseased, vines that respected only the lines they created. The chemical Bayer Monsanto's created to kill the vines, dissolve them, they said, would also destroy our flesh. That was a non-starter. But everything got much better when we yielded to the ubiquity of the bees and the other bugs, the worms and the birds. Then fruit started growing everywhere between our bodies. Berries, apples, peaches, pears, grapes, every fruit. Then people formed new fruits by simply dreaming them up together. It was only then that we began to see the beauty of our vines, their stunning shapes, their knots, their grooves, their different colors in the sun, matching and enhancing the different shades and textures of our skin. Finally, we could see what this was, what we were. Lovely weeds. My friends, connectivity, in many ways, is a hard-won revelation born of our salvation. It is one thing to acknowledge that all things are connected at the level of the biological or the ecological or even the spiritual. But it is another thing to align our bodies, our buildings, and our designing of dwelling to enable that sensing. To sense and know connectivity requires the remaking of the commons, and that remaking involves everything. It turns us irreversibly toward weaving together the body, the building, designing, and land. And that by that I mean weaving together our lives with the desire of God for our lives in the land. That is the redemption of place. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.